Good evening, I'm Stephen Cummings and welcome again to another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. And as per usual, our objective is always to have an engaging, interactive and civil discourse, and in so doing help develop a culture of peace and understanding through constructive dialogue and yes, as I always say, through citizens' participation. Our topics are wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground and learn from each other, irrespective of our differing views. Now, last Wednesday on the Citizens Community Forum, we began a discussion on the budget 2021-2022. Now that the fiscal package has been presented, we want to have some reactions to what was presented on Monday, 4th of October. Now, at this time, inside the Citizens Community Forum, our topic, reactions to budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a global pandemic. And to discuss the issue, joining me via Zoom once again is Mr. Rishi Maharaj, Managing Director of Privacy Advisory Services Limited, or PAS, PAS. And Mr. Maharaj is formerly of the Equigov Institute, and we are told it still exists, but with primary focus on the state sector, civil society organizations, transparency, good governance, monitoring and evaluation. Mr. Maharaj, welcome again to the Citizens Community Forum.
Thank you for having me, Stephen, and good night to all your listeners.
And also we have, not for the first time, Mr. Trevor Johnson, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. And Mr. Johnson, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Stephen. Good evening to you, Rishi, and to all our viewers, or listeners, rather. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us. Well, our topic this evening, gentlemen, reactions to budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a global pandemic. And, the 2021-2022 budget was the second national budget presented during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the seventh national fiscal package under the government led by Dr. Keith Rowley, the Dr. Keith Rowley-led administration. And just, looking at the expenditure for when we talk about looking at those figures, we saw where total revenue was capped at 43.33 billion. Oil revenue at 12.614 billion, non-oil revenue capped at 29.712 billion, capital revenue 1 billion, and we had total expenditure net of capital repayment and sinking fund contribution $52.429 billion. So that we basically had a $52 billion budget with a deficit of 9.096, and there are lots of lots of discussions around about our growing deficit and why we continue to be running deficit budgets, but that's something that we'd probably go into a little later on in the discussion. I wanted to start out the the discussion though this evening. I want to sort of bring Mr. Johnson in here, or before I bring in Mr. Johnson, because there's something that I want to specifically treat with from a labor perspective. So what I will do, I just have you just hold just 1 second and probably just flip the coin as it were, and have Mr. Maharaj open the discussion, because I know we began this discussion on the previous Wednesday of the Citizens Community Forum, and Mr. Maharaj had some some projections and some forecasting. Rishi, the 2021-2022 budget, how was it for you? How would you describe the package? And was there or were there things that you were predicting actually came true?
Well, I think the budget. But first of all, like I said in the previous session we had, I don't envy the Minister of Finance or the government in the situation that they're in, because, like I said, it's a very tight rope that they have to walk in terms of balancing revenue with the fact that we're not gaining as much revenue as we normally could have, and still trying to meet expectations and still trying to keep an economy buoyant and have it begin to grow during a very challenging time worldwide. So I think the Minister of Finance in delivering his fiscal package was a lot of talk, stuff that we've heard before, stuff that I know many commentators have said that we've heard these things going on for many, many years. Like I mentioned, you mentioned the whole aspect last time we spoke on digitalization. I said we're like 10 years behind.
Yes.
And I think it's bang on target, because most of the stuff I heard that he mentioned from a digitalization perspective was stuff that we dealt with when I was in government way back in 2009 to 2012. So I think, again, the Minister of Finance tried to give as best as a picture as to exactly how the state of the economy is and that they're going on the right track. But then again, it always comes down, and every year we say the same thing over and over and over. It comes down to implementation. How well are we at implementing the things that we speak? Because, like I said, from a public policy point of view, the classic definition of public policy is that public policy is not what you say, it's what you do. So I think, we need to now move away from this idea of X amount of money is presented for this ministry, X amount of money for this ministry, and move now towards output. Now that we've allocated these monies to these ministries, most of it for projects to help the country develop or for programs to help us move forward, we now need to see substance going forward. I think that's what everybody's looking for right now. Substance from all of this presentation that the minister have put forth on the 4th of October.
Okay, all right. Rishi, we'll come back to you in a short bit. I know there's lots more that we would want to get from you in terms of reactions. Mr. Johnson, your initial reaction to what you heard from the finance minister, and by extension the opposition leader, you may want to to reference her as well. What is your, how do you assess what you've heard on Monday 4th of October?
Yes, certainly, Stephen. If I can start from, well, obviously a labor perspective.
Yes.
I think when I listen to the budget, and I think we need to look at it from a point of view of sometimes how is it going to, how the average worker, the CPEP worker, the bank worker, the worker in the energy sector, how is the average, the unemployed, the young person, how is this going to impact them, impact their lives? And quite frankly, Stephen, this particular budget, I don't think if you ask any of those categories of persons that I mentioned, how will the budget have impacted them, I don't think you'd probably necessarily come away with a very positive response from any of them. For the workers in the public sector and the state sector, for example, we heard the Minister of Finance would have mentioned, okay, he has instructed or has directed the CPO to start negotiations. And
yes.
I heard a few commentators, say, well, that's positive, but if you understand the process of negotiations, for him just to start negotiations, that really means very little to the average public sector worker, who many of them are behind 2 or 3 negotiating periods. We're in 2021, and most of these workers, their last collective agreement was 2014. You have and then you even go back, the workers of Cipriani 2007, the workers of Cardi 2004. So there are people in this country who are 15, 16 years behind. So when you come in and tell them in 2021, we're going to start negotiations, that could go on for another 2-3 years, because who says what is the CPO going to come with? We don't know. No yes. offer has been put on the table. So this is not until we get more details, and unfortunately with the breakdown, I have to call it, of the budget debate over the weekend in Parliament, because the minister said several times during his budget speech that more details will be forthcoming from the various line ministers during the budget debate. But as we all know now, the budget debate collapsed. So that when are we going to hear all of these gaps that was left? Notwithstanding, the minister spoke for almost, I think, it's 4 hours. But as Rishi would have said, maybe I have another. He spoke a long time, but really.
Yes. Well, he was in fact, over 3 hours on his legs.
Yes. So And let me just say, acknowledge, yes, there are areas in the budget. In my view, what I would say, the budget in some areas may benefit at what I call a narrow bandwidth of persons or sectors. You know, he spoke about incentives for, you know, businesses that do export, you know, businesses where there's a digitalization type of input. So
Yes.
all of those, yes, a narrow bandwidth. In 1 year, you're not going to get to, there are some businesses already in that field, so they will benefit. But then you're not going to get a whole lot of businesses coming in. We are, I would acknowledge, we are in unprecedented times in the midst of a global pandemic. But remember, many businesses that already exist, micro businesses, small businesses, have been in lockdown for, in some 2 lockdowns over the past 18 months.
Yes.
If you just visit many of our malls, City Mall in the East, for example, you'd be amazed at the number of stores that have closed and are unlikely to reopen because they cannot, most small businesses cannot take a hit for a month, far less 2 or 3 months. And in this case, we have had lockdowns for longer than that.
Okay.
The bar owners, the owners of you know, the cinemas, etc. So yes, I acknowledge the public health regulations and it was for the public good, but perhaps we needed to take a better look at how we balance that. How, and I'll end here on this part. How do you tell a business that has been in lockdown for over a year? How are they going to survive or just start back up? So it's not a surprise that we have started back with these sort of safe zone
zones.
businesses. And you're seeing the very sluggish start because many of the businesses simply cannot catch their breath to recover enough to even participate in the safe zones. And that should signal to us that we have a challenge on our hands.
All right, and we're going to develop that further as we go along in our program this evening, the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and we are talking this evening, our topic, reactions to Budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a pandemic. And I have with me Managing Director of Privacy Advisory Services Limited, Mr. Rishi Maharaj, and the Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. Rishi, let me come back to you. I know that the area of digitalization is one that is close to your heart because of where you sit and where you have been and continue in terms of, you know, that particular sector. And when you opened, you know, in your opening, you did mention that that these are some of the same things that you've been that you heard in previous budget. You heard on Monday last. But what is important as well, the government seems to be seeing this business of digitalization as the equalizer, as it were, that would bring the kinds of, you know, put that fillip in terms of economic transformation. Was there anything else that you believe, you know, we may have probably missed in the budget that the minister may not have focused on the same topic of digitalization?
Well, I think it comes down to the question of, I don't think I've heard this explained by anyone in the budget, the new minister, or in any documents that I've seen. What is it exactly do they mean by digitalization? Digitalization is more than just putting up a website and saying, look, we have a website, you can now submit forms online to this website, and that's it. Digitalization goes further into that. It goes into your processes, it goes into your back-end systems, and how you now go through these, collect these applications, collate it, who does it go to make sure you streamline it. Digitalization, I mean, like I said, back 10 years ago, we were speaking about cross-governmental services, creating a model whereby once you've accessed one service, some of the information you would have input to get onto that service would have been collated. So when you go to try to access a new service, some of your information is already pre-populated, so you don't have to do that. Again,
talking about that single electronic window.
Single electronic window, single transaction, the way to go about it. But again, it's all about, I haven't heard anyone mention what it is they mean by digitalization. Okay, it's a whole process, and I can tell you from personal experience, trying to work with ministries to be able to re-engineer their process, to be able to make it more streamlined, to cater to the needs of citizens who want things quicker, faster, easier, but also to maintain that level of transparency, accountability, and ensure that you're able to weed out those who aren't supposed to be there. It's a lot of work that needs to take place. It doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
And it's going to take a lot of effort working with everybody. All the stakeholders need to be involved. It's not just a government thing. You need to involve the unions, because it's talking about workers. Because sometimes when workers hear the word digitalization, they feel, oh, you're trying to take my job.
Yes.
I will no longer be needed. So it's about working with everybody, all the key stakeholders, to ensure that you come up with services that are able to meet the needs of your customers. I think it is that government needs to move away from thinking that, well, you have to come at me anyhow, so I can do whatever I want. So more customer focused, and that takes a lot of work to do.
All right. So that you wanted to get more clarity on what government means by digitalization and breaking down some of the technicalities and as to how this would be applied and what are the benefits. And now when we talk about benefits, it's a statement that's been made that it would make for better transparency and good governance and all of that. But some people will tell you those might just be just statements, but not really explaining what the focus is.
Yeah, because I think we're still stuck in a mantra, and this has been going on for decades. I know when I first came into the public service in 2005, they were talking about something called output budgeting, and dealing with outcomes as opposed to how much money you spend. Because that's how ministries normally work, is that you need to know how much money you spend, and you need to spend all the money you've been allocated. Otherwise, when it comes to the next fiscal year, the budget department will say, well, you didn't spend X amount of money, so maybe you don't need that amount. So we need to move away from that sense of thinking, well, we've spent $20 million, let's call it a figure arbitrarily, to upgrade Wi-Fi to everybody. So everybody has Wi-Fi. What does that mean? Does that mean I will have more access to government services? Does that mean I'll have more access to educational services? We need to move away. I think we need to switch the conversation a bit from just dealing with dollars and cents, how much you've spent, to what am I getting for that money that you've spent. Because I am of the view, and I'm not sure if Trevor would agree with me, that you don't need to spend exorbitant amount of money to achieve what you need to achieve.
Well, I'm sure
understanding your resource and understanding how you use it. So just because I don't spend $20 million this year as opposed to last year, doesn't mean I'm going to get the same bang for my buck. It's about value for money. I think we need to move the conversation towards that avenue of now. Yes, I've seen you've allocated X amount of money from ministries, health, education, national security, digitalization, etc. Now, what am I as a citizen? What am I as a, like Trevor said, the man on the street? What am I going to get for that?
Okay. No, I'm sure Trevor Johnson would agree with you. But I wanted to sort of, Trevor, I want to go back on that that point that you raised, and specifically on the issue of labor. Let me just read quickly what the Minister of Finance would have said as part of his presentation. I mean, he had what? It was 167-page document, a very, very large document, and there are lots of things went into that document, and I think that for the coming weeks and months, and we are going to be analyzing that for sure. But this is what the minister said as part of his presentation, and of course the budget comes at a critical time in the economic life of the country, and especially when tension, you have tension in terms of the industrial relations climate between labor and government, perhaps spurred on more forcibly by the shutdown of the country as a major we can look at, I suppose, one may want to go back and talk about the issue of the Petroleum refinery that was shut down, and then coming after, you had a lot of businesses that were forced to close their doors. But we heard there was some sweeteners, Mr. Johnson, on Monday, and the minister, this is what he said, and I quote, Madam Speaker, we are moving to settle outstanding wage negotiations in the public service. I have instructed, that word again, operational word, we look at that in more detail. I have instructed the Chief Personnel Officer to commence in 2022 outstanding wage negotiations with the relevant representative union, trade unions in the public service. I have also advised that several nurses in the regional health authorities are employed on temporary contracts. As a result, I have instructed again the Chief Personnel Officer to investigate this situation and its implementation for implications, for pension arrangements and recommended solutions to ensure that the employment contracts of these nurses are regularized. And I expect this exercise to be completed by the end of December 2021. But he goes on to say, Mr. Johnson, that the issue of pensionable service for daily rated workers has been long outstanding. And to resolve the situation, I put the service of these daily the situation, and I put the service of these daily rated workers on a pensionable basis. I propose to finalize the arrangement for daily rated, a plan in 2022. So again, some sweeteners, and whether there will be some kind of realization of this. What's your take, Mr. Johnson?
Well, a key word you just mentioned there, Stephen, we have to really see the actualization or the realization of these. And as you also highlighted, and the minister himself acknowledged, many of these, like the pension issues, these are issues that are over, a decade or more old. So they are not new. Unfortunately, quite frankly, there are many workers who would have died not having gotten the benefit of these pension arrangements that you would have spoken about. And you know how difficult it is, even if it's realized now, for their families to come and try to get some, the way we operate in Trinidad,
yes,
with in terms of these claims, etc. So that, as I said earlier, you used the term sweeteners. I am not that optimistic in using that term because we have been there before, and I think Rishi
you've
was
seen that. Yeah, you've seen that before. Yeah. Yes, and you've heard that
and I know
before.
Rishi spoke about the whole on the digitalization process, and I could sort of sense the frustration because I mean, you just have to visit a licensing office, a national insurance board, the customs, so whether it's an individual to get your ID card. Our systems and our agencies are not talking to each other. So that, as you said, you have an ID card, national insurance, all of these things, even for workers to file your income taxes, etc. These things should be connected, or even, unfortunately, you get stopped by a police officer on the street. They should be able to log in and get information, and the minister is talking a lot, and we are not seeing delivery. And with regard to the workers' issues in particular, as I said, the pension issue, I know, for example, the daily paid unions, National Union of Government and Federated Workers, the Contractors and General Workers Union, the Amalgamated Workers Union, they all will tell you that they have been sitting down talking to the government for years about this daily paid pension thing. And what they would like to see is some very tangible steps. And I have to say, the minister calling in business a week or two before the budget and calling in unions a week. We met with the minister 1 week, I think somewhere on the 28th or the 29th, the trade union federations. That's not good enough, Stephen, because from now when the 2022-23 budget will be, you can schedule meetings with the various stakeholders
Okay.
well in advance so you can sit down. This cosmetic thing of calling in the various stakeholders a week or two before the budget,
Okay.
the government
Yeah.
has to change its stance on these things.
Yeah, some tardiness there on the part of the Minister of Finance and by extension the government. I hear you, Mr.
Well, it's not once, for the record. This is the thing. You need a quantum leap change. It cannot be every year we have the same process where a week or two before you get, you call
have
in
these
stakeholders.
hurried discussions. Yeah, I hear you.
It basically means it is of no real value. For all the stakeholders are able to do at that time is present a list to you. You usually hear the term a wish list. So business has a wish list, labor has a wish list. But if we can sit down months in advance, labor has something called a labor economic alternative plan. Since 2016, we submitted it to the government. Many parts of it are still valid. Why can't we sit down and have a discussion on that? Why can't the government sit down and meet with the chambers?
Well, Mr. Johnston, now that the 2021-2022 budget has been presented, maybe now is an opportune time to advance some of those recommendations or to revisit some of those. But I'll come back in terms of a discussion. But I'll come back to you shortly. Rishi, we talked about on the last time I think we touched a bit on the property tax, and there is the view that we would have to get somewhere in the vicinity of 50% plus in terms of collections before there is any kind of move towards persons having to pay. Of course, the land and building taxes is something that we've known for decades, but coming under a new name of the property tax. Do you believe that we are going to be successful in that drive? I know that there are lots of people who are complaining about the process. Seems to be very cumbersome and a 7-page document in some instances, and you are being asked to the document of itself can confuse the ordinary man who may not be academically inclined and at certain levels, so that there is a sort of a state of confusion among many persons. Do you believe that we would be successful in this whole collection drive under the property tax system?
Well, yeah, I think that is definitely a challenge that the government is definitely going to face. Like you said, the Minister of Finance said that they need to gather a certain percentage of valuation of documents so they can do a proper, I guess, valuation scale to be able to charge these taxes. But then again, you're now dependent on people providing information to you. I myself have gone through the form, and it does take some double thinking to really look at the form, and you're wondering in my mind, is all of this information needed? Is it necessary?
Oh, necessary, yes.
I'm wearing my data protection hat here to say, is it that the government is mining for more information that it needs for other purposes? So, these, and of course, we know the leader of the opposition, and the opposition itself has taken a stance against it, and they have already alluded to the fact that they will challenge it in court in terms of the legality of the whole thing. So that being aside, I think, to begin with, any tax any government wants to impose at any time is never going to be popular. That's just the facts.
All right.
But whether or not people, I think what the government is doing is trying to a very heavy-handed approach, and that they're saying you have until, I believe it's November 30th to submit. I think the fine is anywhere upward to about $5,000.
Yes.
It's a sizable fine, and again, we know the climate that we're in. We know there are many people who are either unemployed, underemployed, or have faced
truly a challenge there.
Challenges.
Yeah.
So, it is a heavy-handed approach the government has taken, something that has the ability to backfire on them. So I really worry as to whether or not they will get the quantum that they require to be able to meet their objectives.
All right, and we'd just like to remind our listeners that you are listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, and our topic this evening, reactions to Budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a global pandemic. And I have with me Mr. Rishi Maharaj, Managing Director of Privacy Advisory Services Limited, and Mr. Trevor Johnson, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. Gentlemen, what we will do at the moment, we will take a short break and come back, and we will continue the discussion. Mr. Johnson, when we come back in the second half hour, I want you to also address that issue of the property tax as we began there with Rishi Maharaj. So we come back in a short while and continue the discussion. Hello, I'm Stephen Cummings. Join us every Wednesday for the Citizens Community Forum. Where are we now? Your assessment.
We're in a very dark place. As Mr. Vivian Ipol wrote in a title of his book, we are in an area of darkness.
The structure of the economy between 2009 and 2019, Stephen, landed this economy in the 25 worst performing economies in the world. Even my honest answer is, except for the poorest and most vulnerable, we have to cut. It's not as if we have a choice.
And that's why I'm saying, Stephen, we really need some clear guidance and direction from the government in terms of what's the long-term plan. We know we're in a dark place, but we need you to be able to show us the light and show us, well, okay, we're headed in that direction. We don't want to end up like the Israelites wandering for 40 years in the desert and making no progress whatsoever.
And we are streaming live on YouTube, FBN TV, Facebook, and Isaac 98.1 FM every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m. And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and this evening we are discussing the business of the budget and looking at what was presented on the 4th of October, both from the Finance Minister and the Honorable Opposition Leader, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, Mr. Johnson, I wanted to have you pick up on that last point there of the property tax, and I know that it's going to be a discussion that we are going to be having for quite some time because of the very nature of this system. We know that if we go back over the decades, we remember the land and building taxes. It is nothing new really, but I wanted to ask you, what is different? What do you see as being different from what was the old, land and building taxes which people paid, and this new system? Now I know one of the areas probably has to do with this new revenue authority, which is suppose the government is seeing as that authority to be able to have a sort of enforceable type of system in place. But what is different from what we knew as land and building taxes to what we now calling the property tax, Mr. Johnson?
Well, first of all, let me just say from the outset that from a labor perspective, our position on this is that we would have communicated this to the Minister of Finance. We believe that now is not the time to introduce this property tax. we did not reject it categorically, but we said, given, of course, all that has the context in which we are in, the global pandemic, the fact of so many workers have lost their jobs or have lost income, etc., and not many employment opportunities, households are suffering. Now is simply, it's really insensitive to seek to introduce this property tax at this time. Now, we understand that the minister's rationale is that, of course, the property tax is going to be used almost exclusively in the various to the various regional
local government, bodies.
etc.
Yes.
That was the expectation. You might think with the old land and building taxes, but you would hear most of the regional corporations complain that that the funds simply did not reach them.
Yes.
So that I don't know, even if the property tax is introduced, if the government will have a system in place to ensure that it in fact reaches to the various regional corporations, so that we can see improvement in the various communities.
Yeah, but as you said that, Mr. Johnson, I would allow you to develop that point further. There's also the concern about the property tax, whatever is collected, goes to the consolidated fund, and may not necessarily find its way, that trickle-down effect to treating with some of the issues that affect, I suppose, you and I in our own communities.
Right, so exactly, and that's one of the concerns. I mean, I don't know, for example, that discussions have been held even with the various regional bodies. How is this going to be allocated in terms of quantum or percentage, etc.? So all of these things are discussions that need to be had, need to be worked out. As Rishi would have been saying earlier, it's a very apparently sort of convoluted form filling process, which is being again delegated to the homeowner without any consideration for whatever abilities that they may require, or what help might be needed for them to even complete these forms. But come what may, property tax, called by whatever name, is a form of revenue for the government. And I know, of course, yes, it is acknowledged government must collect revenue in order to run the country. But sometimes we may be under the impression that you would be surprised at the amount, called by whatever name, whether it's a PAYE, VAT, motor vehicle tax, customs duties, fees. I mean, there are lists, hundreds of taxes and fees that this government collects. The issue is not, the issue is really one of efficiency of the collection processes. So rather than the introduction of new taxes, because by the government's own admission, the minister has acknowledged there's a deficit, even when he talks about hiring 100 persons for Inland Revenue or the Revenue Authority, whose job will be tasked with the issue of following up in terms of tax collections. You have that issue at the National Insurance Board, where they have acknowledged they have a deficit of persons to run down errant employers who have collected national insurance or deducted it from the salaries of workers, but have not paid it over to the national insurance. So anywhere you go, you look, we seem to have a deficiency of taxes.
And it's not that administration,
and it's not that people are not willing to pay their taxes, because the tax amnesty in 2018 or thereabout collected over $1 billion. The minister himself acknowledged that the recent tax amnesty collected over $1 billion. So the issue is not so much that people are not willing to pay their taxes. What you need are efficient processes and efficient tracking.
And I suppose, yes, that's what Rishi Maharaj was referring to as well. The efficiency and just getting it right. Because we have been plagued, by the bureaucracy and all the red tape. When you go to many government ministries, you're faced with that situation, and that's why I had raised that point a little earlier on about whether this whole digitalization is going to bring us to level of improved, efficiency, as it were. Let me go back to Rishi Maharaj. We saw over the many budgets this recurring figure of term deficit budget and deficit financing. I think this financial year, we are again back at some 9 point something in terms of our gap, that which we'll have to find the revenue to service our expenditure. But when you look at what the minister would have said in his budget presentation as well, he's looking for, I think, 2024 towards a balanced budget, Rishi. Do you think that is achievable, knowing that we've had a history of budget of deficits, going back as far as I suppose you and I can remember? A balanced budget in 2024, is that an achievable feat, Rishi?
I would be amazed if the minister could actually achieve that. I know prior administration have come in and made the commitment that, during their term, within 4 years, they'll bring the budget back in line with, you spend exactly how much you make. While I applaud the minister and the government for having a target, I mean, it's good to have a target. You need to have something to aim for. Given everything that we have as a country in terms of our high dependency on oil and gas, and we know what's going on with that. Even with ascendancy in oil prices and natural gas prices now, I think I've seen recently on BBC where Europe is looking for higher gas prices during this winter. The fact is that we do not produce. Our problem is that the production just isn't there.
Yes, very low.
We're not producing
production
levels. And even if we have now discovered, I think within the recent year, 6 months, we've discovered certain troves of natural gas. It's one thing to discover, it's another thing to bring up to production.
Yes,
that takes another 2-3 year timeline.
And then you are faced with global market forces.
And who knows exactly, because again, we are price takers, we don't set the price. So it's really something that I think the government has to look at. But I think it's important that we really try as best as possible to curb expenditure with how much we're coming in at revenue. It's an important step because the fact is also, especially with the pandemic, accelerated our borrowing, and we have been borrowing extensively over many years. Even during the time of the previous administration, there still was extensive borrowing.
Yes.
And that borrowing, again, it creates a debt level that has to be paid. It's probably not going to be paid, in this 5-6 year, but we're going to be paid by us later on, or by our children or children's children. So there's a debt burden. And the fact is, can we generate enough economic activity to be able to maintain that debt burden? So while again, like I said, while I applaud the minister for having a target of 2024, I just honestly, to the best of my ability, don't see that happening where you can bring expenditure down to revenue.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, again, I'm dealing with the issue of labor. I think labor has been accused, and continuously so, of not wanting to be I'm also referencing that issue of labor moving away from the negotiating table when we had that meeting there with the NTAC grouping. I even heard the Minister of Labor talking about let's come together, let's sit over the table, let's have let's have a discussion, let's see how we can work together. But for many a year, Mr. Johnson, you've had these proposals, from unions and labor bodies and representatives, and so going to the government, and I'm sure that you will agree that there are tons and tons of documents, stacked away somewhere that have not really been treated with, and maybe these are some of the issues that the labor movement is very, very concerned about. How optimistic are you? I think we can safely say that we have a new Minister of Labor. because he is I think he came into the ministry probably about 2-3 years ago. How optimistic that this Minister of Labour is going to be a little softer, maybe listen a little more to Labour in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, to be quite honest, Stephen, I don't think in the time that this new minister has been in, we have not really seen any different approach. Labour has not seen any different approach in the last 10 years, because we had the previous, when I say the previous administration of the People's Partnership, and then of course we came into the first iteration of the PNM, and then this second term, and so we have had about 4 Labour ministers throughout that spectrum. And quite frankly, regardless of administration, we have not seen a Labour minister that has picked up the mantle. And we are not asking for any Labour minister to be soft with Labour, quote unquote. What we are simply asking for is for them to simply fulfill their responsibilities as a Labour minister. We have seen consultation after consultation on all the Labour legislation, and not a single piece of Labour legislation has been brought to Parliament in 10 years, right? So that when, the first, under People's Partnership, under the first round of the PNM, and in this new administration. So Labour has attended every consultation we have been asked to attend, on whether it's contract labor, whether it's retrenchment and severance benefit, whatever, whether it's productivity, we have attended every single consultation.
Yes.
That cannot be denied. And yet, despite that, we are seeing legislation on all other sorts of things come into Parliament, but nothing to deal with any amendments to labor legislation, updated labor legislation, etc. So when you see Labour move away from NTAC, that was not a decision that was taken lightly.
Okay.
Labour is prepared to engage in social dialogue, but it is not prepared to engage in social dialogue as a cosmetic thing, as we said, that you call us a week before the budget, and so we give you a wish list, because that's all we can do at that point in time.
Okay, I know you're going back. Yes, you're taking us back there, Mr. Johnson. I'll come back to you again. We actually we are almost towards the end of the program this evening, but I wanted to get a couple of questions in as well before we close the program, and which is the issue of transfers and subsidies. And this whole business of the social safety net. I know that not only this administration, but going back to several administrations, every budget that is presented, there is always that area of sensitivity where even this current budget, the finance minister was clear to state that he's not going to really have any cuts, if at all, where the social sector is concerned. And my question is, how long can we afford to carry this sector, knowing that that the more that you give, the more there will be that need. So that how long do you think that we'll be able to carry such such a sector? Barring the fact that we may be seeing some spikes, upward spike in terms of the price of oil. I think the minister did talked about a $65 US per barrel. So that, how long, in spite of that, what do you see for the future of the social sector in Trinidad and Tobago?
It's definitely a challenge. I think this is where, to Trevor's point just now, you need all hands on the table. You need to have meaningful dialogue and not cosmetic dialogue. And I agree totally with Trevor that you need to have a level of trust. And I believe that there are sectors, the social sectors, in terms of you have a lot of NGOs, civil society-based organizations, labor, business, all have a part to play, not only the government. They're not only carrying this burden, but uplifting people out of vulnerable situations and putting them on a level where they can see about themselves. I don't think anybody wants to see somebody live on grants for the rest of their lives. Obviously, it needs to be there because there are certain sectors of the society that will need that help. Come with me. But obviously, these are extraordinary times, as we've said before. And these are extraordinary times where government has had to, dip into its coffers and provide, benefits for people that normally would not need to get these benefits.
Yes.
But obviously, in order to come out of it now, because obviously this is a burden that cannot be carried out for too long, because it's going to then be a weight on the treasury, a weight on resources. I mean, this is where government needs. I think this is where I did not get from the budget, especially those small and medium enterprises, those small businesses that are out there that employ a large sector of the community. We know the big companies out there have had the ability to weather the storm.
Yes.
But the people who have been affected are the people who work
Small,
in
micro, medium
small
size.
micro, the bars, people who work in restaurants, people who work in casinos, people who live. I don't mean no disrespect to this, but paycheck to paycheck because of their needs and everything else that they have to deal with. I didn't see anything in the budget that provides some level of comfort or guarantee or some level of support to these businesses. Because one way to get people off these grants and to get people back into employment is obviously to get them, and as Trevor mentioned, you visit the malls. Now, I've been to the malls as of late. Just recently, I passed through Port of Spain on one of my few occasions, and you're seeing, stores that are normally there closed. Good example, the TSTT that used to be on Independence Square. I think that's where McDonald's used to be, and now it used to be TSTT. It's up for sale.
Yes, I can get a sense. Yes, I think your message is very well received, and we just like to remind our listeners that you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. Our topic this evening: reactions to Budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a global pandemic. And I have with me Mr. Rishi Maharaj, Managing Director of Privacy Advisory Services Limited, and Mr. Trevor Johnson, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Stephen Cummings. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we are out of time, but before we close the program officially, I'd just like, if both of you, there's so much more that we could have touched on, but maybe we would have another opportunity to do that. In the closing moments, if I can get from you both 60 seconds closing remarks on the budget, what you would have heard, and some recommendations going forward as we continue to straddle through a pandemic here in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Johnson, 60 seconds, your closing remarks.
Yes, the government certainly needs to improve its revenue collection processes, because this will be key. We haven't had time to touch on the issue of Petrotrin. The government has been silent on that. The steel industry, there are many other plants in the Point Lisas area, for example, that are mothballed. So we need to hear from the government if you want to create employment, stimulate foreign exchange input. These are some of the areas that you certainly need to look at. And of course, we look forward to the start of negotiations in the public and in the state sector, as the Minister of Finance would have promised.
Rishi Maharaj, 60 seconds.
I would like to see actual implementation coming out of this budget. We've all heard the talk before. We've all heard some of these ideas talked about on numerous occasions. I think it's about meaningful implementation on the government's hand. I think it's about meaningful accountability, or holding the government to account for its action. And that's, I think, where the media, civil society, the labor unions, all citizens play an important part in ensuring that this is what you said you were going to do. Have you done it? And if not, explain to us why not.
All right, gentlemen, Mr. Trevor Johnson and Sir Rishi Maharaj, thank you both for joining us on the Citizens Community Forum this evening. It has been a pleasure, and I'm sure we will have another opportunity to chat with you again as we, go through, I guess, the challenges here in Trinidad and Tobago, not only here, but, many other parts of the world. But again, gentlemen, thank you so much again for being part of the Citizens Community Forum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, listeners.
Mr. Trevor Johnson there and Mr. Rishi Maharaj, both talking with me there on the Citizens Community Forum. Well, I'm Stephen Cummings. That's our program for this evening. And until another edition, we, of course, continue to discuss the issues, national issues, social issues here in Trinidad and Tobago. So until the next program, I'm Stephen Cummings. See you next Wednesday. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.